Imagine a city frozen in the final heartbeat of its people. Streets abandoned mid-step, voices lost in ash, the air heavy with smoke and silence. Mount Vesuvius looming above, patient, inevitable, and every moment, every gesture, every breath, captured forever beneath layers of time. Tonight, we follow those last moments. We walk with the unburied voices. We breathe slowly with a city that will never move again. There was a morning in Pompeii that felt no different from the one before. A sky, the color of soft clay, hung over tiled rooftops, and lazy smoke rose from bakeries that had been awake since dawn. The scent of fresh bread drifted through narrow streets still cool from the night air. The stones beneath the feet of merchants and housewives were damp with dew. And somewhere a dog barked half-heartedly at the sound of a passing cart. The world was ordinary, and that was what made it so fragile. For no one could sense the weight of the mountain that loomed above them.
No one
could imagine the slow anger that slept beneath its green slopes. Mount Vesuvius stood like a silent giant, calm, harmless, almost forgotten, its shadow falling softly over a city that believed it had forever. The day was warm, but not unbearable, the kind of warmth that made you wish to linger in courtyards, to listen to the splash of fountains and the murmur of gossip about the coming festival, about the traders from across the sea who would arrive with silk and oil, and stories from lands that sounded too far to exist life. Hummed gently like bees around an orchard, the walls of villas gleamed with painted myths lovers, strolled between columns that framed gardens full of laurel and fig, and above it all the sun traced its patient path, as it always had, and as everyone thought it always would, but beneath the earth. Deep where no one could see or dream, something had begun to stir. The air inside the mountain shifted, the rock groaned, slow. Invisible movements of pressure and heat, ancient as the world itself, began to gather. But in Pompeii no one felt it, not yet, not in that tender hour when the baker pulled his last batch of loaves from the oven, or when a child's laughter echoed down the street lined with merchants calling out the price of wine, or when the amphitheater sat empty and quiet, waiting for the next spectacle that would never come. The mountain had been silent for so long that people had stopped calling it dangerous. It was simply there, a part of the horizon, as natural as the sea, as constant as the wind, and even when a faint tremor rippled through the ground, those who noticed only shrugged. Perhaps it was a god stretching, or the earth settling. No reason to worry. No reason to pause their errands or prayers or petty arguments. Life went on, because it always had. Because endings never announce themselves politely. They arrive as ordinary days, disguised as routine, wrapped in calm. Pompeii did not know it was already living its final hours. As the city woke, its voices blended into a single hum, the murmur of human presence layered over the rhythm of the sea that lapped softly against the distant shore. Fishermen hauled in their nets, slaves scrubbed marble floors. The wealthy reclined beneath painted ceilings, where scenes of myth smiled down on them. And somewhere, a woman checked her reflection in polished bronze, arranging her hair in a way that pleased her. All of it small, all of it fleeting, though none could see that yet. There is something haunting about stillness before disaster, something painfully human in how we mistake peace for permanence, for safety. In that still morning, the mountain waited, patient, listening. The air was clean and thin. And above the green slopes, birds still sang. They had not yet decided to flee. They had not yet read the message written in the trembling roots of the earth. The day stretched forward warm and golden, each hour passing as if borrowed from eternity, and the people of Pompeii lived it as though nothing would ever take it away, as though stone and breath were the same, as though tomorrow was a promise instead of a fragile wish. At midday the markets were at their fullest, the sound of coins clinking, the smell of roasted nuts, the laughter of buyers haggling for fruit that gleamed in the sunlight. A musician plucked at his strings in the corner of a courtyard, and the tune floated lazily between the columns, toward the open sky that showed no sign of anger. The calm before destruction is not silent. It is alive, almost painfully alive, because the world gives us beauty even as it prepares to break. And Pompeii was beautiful that day, its walls alive with color, its people with motion, its streets with noise and scent and warmth. If one stood upon a rooftop and looked toward the mountain, one would see only the shimmer of heat rising. No plume, no ash, only the illusion of peace. Yet deep within, the pressure was rising, molten stone climbing slowly through veins of rock. The mountain's heart beginning to pound harder, and still the city laughed. Still it feasted. Still it dreamed. By late afternoon, the wind shifted, faint and strange. Birds began to fly lower, as if searching for escape. Dogs whined, uneasy. The air grew heavy, and the smell of sulfur, faint and distant, brushed the senses of a few, but it was ignored. Dismissed. Perhaps the sea was restless. Perhaps the gods were in a mood. Still there was no panic. Only unease, small, unspoken. The kind we carry when we sense something wrong, but cannot name it. As evening neared, the first stones rolled down the mountain slope, too small to be noticed, and the smoke began to whisper upward, thin, gray, almost invisible against the dusk, and the mountain exhaled softly, testing the air. As though it too hesitated before what was to come, the people of Pompeii lit their lamps, gathered around tables, ate bread still warm from the ovens, and spoke of plans for the next day, unaware that there would be no next day, unaware that history was already watching, already holding its breath. The stars came out, scattered over the quiet roofs. The faint tremors that passed through the ground were mistaken for dreams. The night deepened, the city slept, and beneath it, the earth began to boil. The morning broke again, pale and thin. The light slipping over the tiled roofs like a sigh, and though it seemed another ordinary dawn, something in the air was different, a heaviness, a taste like metal on the tongue. Birds no longer sang near the mountain, and the dogs that had barked through the night were restless still, pacing. Whining, their ears turned toward the unseen rumble that pulsed beneath the ground, the people stirred, slower than usual. Some mentioning the faint shaking that had woken them, others laughing it away, a tremor, nothing more. Pompeii had known such things before, harmless, forgettable. The earth sometimes moved, but it always stopped, always calmed, and so they believed it would again. The streets filled as they always did, merchants unrolling cloths, slaves carrying baskets, bakers kneading dough, though some paused to glance toward the mountain, whose upper slopes now carried a strange haze, a veil that seemed to shimmer in the rising light. Not smoke exactly, not yet, but something unsettled, something waiting, and though unease threaded through the city like a thin whisper, it was drowned by habit. By the comfort of routine, the illusion of control, but the mountain was no longer sleeping. It was breathing, each breath slower, deeper, heavier. Beneath the earth, the pressure built, gas and fire pressing upward through rock that began to crack, small sounds that grew into groans, deep as thunder. Low as the memory of the sea, and still the people tried to believe in their ordinary morning, in their fragile peace. Until a sound came that silenced all else, a roar, vast and hollow, like the tearing of the sky, and then the mountain split. From its summit, a black column burst upward, twisting and growing. A pillar of ash and stone, rising higher and higher. Wider and darker, the light dimmed, the sun vanished behind a curtain of dust, and the air turned strange, thick, heavy breathing became work, and for a moment, no one moved. They simply stared, mouths open, eyes wide. The mountain that had always been there, calm and green, had become a wound bleeding smoke into the heavens. Some ran, shouting, calling to the gods, to neighbors, to anyone who would listen. Others stood frozen, unable to move, unable to believe. Disbelief is the first refuge of those who witnessed the impossible. Ash began to fall soft at first, like snow-gray flakes landing on hair and shoulders, coating rooftops. It looked harmless, almost beautiful, until the air grew hotter, and the flakes turned thicker, and the world began to darken, even though it was still morning. Torches were lit, though the sun had not set. The ground trembled again, stronger walls shuddered. Jars fell from shelves and shattered. The air was filled with the cries of people and the distant, relentless rumble of the earth tearing itself apart. In the forum, crowds gathered, uncertain where to go, looking to priests, to magistrates, to anyone who seemed to know. But no one did. There were no plans for this, no rituals for the ending of a city. And so people guessed, they prayed, they shouted orders that made no sense. Some fled toward the gates, others ran back. Home to gather belongings, to save jewelry, coins, scrolls, the small things that seemed precious. only until the sky itself began to fall, and yet still. Hope whispered that it would pass, that the mountain would calm again, that tomorrow would come. Hope is stubborn, even in the face of fire. But the fire did not stop. The black column grew taller still, reaching into the clouds, lightning flashing within it. Ash! Thunder rolling down its sides. Ash thickened until breathing was a labor. And still the people ran, shouting names of children lost in the crowd, voices rising and breaking. Dogs barked madly and broke their leashes. Horses reared, carts overturned, and through the chaos the sky continued to darken, turning from gray to brown to near black. And the ash now fell in waves heavy enough to sting, hot enough to burn people, wrapped cloths around their mouths, pressed wet fabric to their faces. But the heat seeped through. The air itself was changing, full of poison, full of weight, still. The sea called to them, the open water that promised escape. And many turned toward it, believing the ships would carry them away. But even the sea had changed. It drew back from the shore. The tide retreating unnaturally, revealing dark sand and stranded fish that thrashed and died, and those who saw it felt a deeper dread. For even the sea was afraid, in the chaos of the streets. Families clung together, some praying, some silent, children crying for mothers who could not be found. Now the city that had been laughter and light now echoed with panic and confusion. The air thickened further, darkened until it felt like night. Torches flickered, their flames distorted by ash and heat, and every sound was muffled. Swallowed by the weight of falling debris, stones the size of fists began to rain from the sky, striking rooftops, cracking tiles, shattering statues, and people covered their heads with cloaks and shields, running, stumbling, bleeding. The gods were silent. The temples no refuge, even the great houses, built of strong stone, began to crumble under the assault, the ash piling high against walls and doors, sealing them, trapping those within. And still the mountain roared, unending, merciless, a sound that filled every breath. It was no longer a place, but a storm, a vast and living shadow. By midday, the city was unrecognizable, the bright frescoes now hidden under gray dust. Fountains clogged streets buried knee-deep in ash, and still the people moved through it, slow, desperate searching. For escape, for air, for light, for some path that would lead them away. But the world was shrinking, the darkness pressing close, and in that choking half-light, time itself seemed to stretch each second longer than the last. Each heartbeat louder, the smell of sulfur burned in the nose. The taste of ash coated the tongue, and the sound of collapse echoed through the streets, stone giving way to fire. Yet even then, even in that chaos, some clung to denial, to ritual, to the familiar, lighting lamps in the gloom as though darkness could be pushed back, calling out to neighbors to come inside as though home could still mean safety. But the homes were dying too, their walls cracking, their roofs sagging beneath the weight of ash that fell without mercy. Outside, the streets had become rivers of dust, thick enough to swallow footprints, slow enough to trick the mind into thinking it might still be escaped, till a new sound came, a deep, rolling surge, as if the mountain itself inhaled, and then exhaled again, harder, louder. And from its side poured a wave of burning rock and gas, invisible at first, then glowing faintly. Then roaring into sight, a cloud that rolled faster than a storm, hotter than fire, unstoppable. It moved down the mountain toward the city, swallowing trees, walls, lives, and behind it the sky glowed red. The world had turned against itself, and Pompeii was caught in its breath. People saw it coming, but could not run fast enough, could not see clearly through the falling ash, could not think beyond the next step, the next breath, the next heartbeat. The gods had turned their faces. The world was ending. And yet even then, in the midst of panic, there were moments of strange calm, people pausing to hold one another, to whisper names, to close their eyes, to wait, as if still hoping the morning would come again, as if still believing in tomorrow. The air had changed. It was no longer air at all, but something thick, something living a breath that burned ash. Falling like endless snow, warm at first, then hot, then heavier, until it clung to skin and hair every step. Slower, every breath shorter. Pompeii was being swallowed inch by inch, the sky gone entirely, only darkness above. Not the clean darkness of night, but one that pressed close. One that hummed with the sound of the mountain's anger. And through it came the glow, faint at first, then stronger. A red pulse that shimmered along the edges of the black, fire reflecting off clouds of ash. Turning the world into a dim, flickering dream, people stumbled through streets that no longer looked like streets. The stones hidden under layers of gray dust that shifted beneath their feet, the air so dense that torches barely burned, their flames sputtering against the windless weight of heat. Voices were muffled, as though the world itself was covered by a blanket, and still through that strange silence. The mountain roared, a steady, endless growl, deep and patient, as if reminding the living how small they were, how temporary. In the villa courtyards where fountains once whispered, ash had filled the basins. Statues of gods stood buried to their knees, their marble faces streaked with soot and rain of stone. The wealthy who had hidden inside thought the walls would protect them, but the air inside grew hotter, harder to breathe. The small openings they had sealed to keep out ash also kept out life. And so they sat in darkness, listening to the distant collapse of roofs, the screams beyond their doors, the sound of the end drawing near. Outside, those who still moved through the streets no longer ran. They walked slow, dazed, the ash blinding, the air too heavy for speech. They clung to one another, two scraps of cloth, two memories of safety, trying to find the sea, the road, anything that resembled escape. But every path was buried, every direction the same, only gray, only dark. The gods gave no sign, no mercy. Thunder rolled through the clouds of ash. Flashes of lightning illuminated for a heartbeat the outlines of people, frozen in motion. Faces tilted upward, eyes wide, mouths open, waiting for a breath that would not come. The city that had once glittered with color was gone. Painted over in a single hue, the murals, the gardens, the laughter, all turned to silence and dust, and still the fire came closer. Waves of heat rolling down from the mountain, invisible, but felt a pressure that crushed the lungs. The flames not yet touching but already claiming inside the temples, priests whispered broken prayers. Incense mixed with smoke until the air itself became holy with fear. The statues of the gods seemed to stare blankly through the haze, unmoved, as if even divinity could do nothing but watch. And outside, the ash piled higher, rising to windowsills, to the height of doors, till streets became tunnels of dust, and movements slowed to crawling. The city was sinking without water, drowning in the breath of the mountain. Far beyond the city, ships that had sailed too close tried to turn back their decks covered in ash, sailors coughing. Eyes burning the sea, no longer calm waves pushing outward, and then pulling back confused as if the earth itself shifted beneath them. Some leapt into the water hoping it would be kinder, but even the sea boiled near the shore, heat spreading through it. Steam rising where fire met tide, the sound of it mixed with the cries from land the wind carried. None of it away, for there was no wind now, the air trapped thick. Holding every sound, every scream, every prayer in place within the city, a mother carried her child wrapped in cloth, pressing the child's face to her chest. To shield it from the falling ash, each step she took sank deeper, her sandals lost behind her, her dress gray. Her hair wet with sweat and dust. She could see nothing ahead, only the vague shape of a building. Maybe a temple, maybe a ruin. She kept walking. The child silent now, too weak to cry, too tired to understand. The world had shrunk to heat and weight and sound. And she kept walking because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant despair. The streets that had once led to markets now led nowhere. Doors buried walls, cracked a city unmade while still standing. The amphitheater, once echoing with cheers, was now a hollow bowl filling with ash, the benches buried row by row, and in its center, a silence that would last centuries. Above it, the sky churned, red flashing through black. The mountain's plume rising still higher, wider, until it spread over miles, blotting out day, even in distant towns. People far away could see it, could feel the ash fall lightly upon them like gray rain. And they whispered of the gods, of punishment, of omens. But in Pompeii, there were no whispers left, only breath and fire. Those who had found shelter in cellars now found death instead. As air turned to poison, as the ash sealed every crack, Some fell asleep before they could wake again, the heat cradling them like a cruel comfort. And above them, the sound of collapse went on, a roof giving way, a wall surrendering, a statue falling forward into dust. And yet even then there was beauty in the destruction. Slow motion of the falling ash, how it swirled in the dim light, how it made the world seem weightless and heavy at once. The shapes of the city dissolving into the storm until nothing had edges. Everything soft, everything blurred, as if the world itself were closing its eyes. People tried to speak, but their voices failed, swallowed by the air that no longer carried sound. It was as though Pompeii had become a dream spoken by the mountain, and the mountain would not stop dreaming. Hour by hour the city grew stiller. Fewer movements, fewer sounds, only the endless hiss of falling ash and the distant living growl of fire, time lost meaning. Day and night blended. Those who still breathed did not know how long they had been trapped. Whether it had been hours or days, the world above them now, unrecognizable. But the mountain remembered. The mountain had waited centuries for this single breath, and now it exhaled until nothing living dared answer. The fire reached the edges of the city. Trees caught flame without warning. The air itself shimmered with heat. And those who had hidden in wells or vaults could hear it, a low rush like wind through leaves. Only it was not wind. It was death itself moving closer, unseen, inevitable. When it came without warning, a surge of searing air, a wave of ash and gas that swept through streets and homes alike. Faster than sound, hotter than flame, the last screams turned to silence. In an instant, the mountain's breath turned everything. It touched to stillness, and the world grew quiet as if in reverence only the hiss of ash falling remained. Soft, endless like snow over graves, Pompeii was gone, not yet buried fully. But gone its heart stopped. Its story paused in fire and above. Yet the mountain still burned patient, slow, alive. By the time the mountain's fire had quieted, the air no longer moved. And what had been a city was now a silence. A gray stillness that stretched from one broken wall to another. The streets buried, the doors sealed, the fountains stilled. The breath of Pompeii held in stone and dust, the storm had passed, leaving behind not ruin, but a memory. Faint and perfect, caught beneath layers of ash that settled like snow over the outlines of life. Chairs stood where they had been left. Bowls still resting on tables, a loaf of bread turned to stone by heat, a dog curled in its chain as though asleep. Every detail kept, every motion halted. The fire had taken sound and color and movement, but not shape. It had frozen all things as they were. The moment of ending turned into eternity. A city paused in its last gesture. Some houses still stood tall, their columns and walls intact, though inside them air had become dust. People had become shadows, their bodies pressed into the ash like whispers. Arms raised, faces hidden, the gestures of fear preserved in silence. The mountain no longer roared. It breathed softly now, a faint smoke trailing from its crown, as if sighing after its own destruction. Around its base the land was gray. No green, no sound, no seabird calling. Even the air seemed unwilling to stir, and over the buried city, the ash continued to fall. Slower now, gentler, sealing everything in layers of time. Within the stillness, there was a strange peace, the kind that comes after great storms, the kind that feels holy and wrong. For though all life was gone, what remained was beautiful in its quietness. The broken beams, the collapsed roofs, the scattered amphorae, all covered by a softness that disguised the violence beneath. And if one stood upon the slope of Vesuvius then, and looked down, one would not see a tragedy, but a plain of pale dust. Shimmering faintly in the weak sunlight, serene, untouched, as if the earth had decided to erase its own wound with calm. The sea too had quieted, the waves creeping slowly back to the shore, carrying with them bits of charred wood, broken pottery. The remnants of the city's heartbeat, but no cries, no fire, only the whisper of tide meeting ash. Time moved differently now, slower, almost unwilling. The sun rose, but its light seemed dulled. As though afraid to disturb the sleeping city and nearby towns, survivors watched from afar. Some wept, some simply stared, unable to understand that a place so full of laughter could vanish in a single day. They spoke of the mountain as a god, of punishment, of destiny. They said the city must have angered heaven, but the truth was simpler, more silent. The earth had simply remembered its power. And Pompeii had been caught breathing centuries past. Rain fell, ash-hardened seasons, layered over one another until the city became part of the hill vines grew where streets once ran. Roots coiled through houses where families had once sat. The world forgot, as it always does. The noise of living drowned out the memory of what had been buried. And the mountain slept again, its slopes green once more. Its anger hidden beneath calm soil, travelers passed without knowing. Farmers plowed fields above bones. Children played on ground that held statues of the dead. The air was sweet again, the sea gentle, and only at night. When the wind blew across the slopes, some swore they could hear faint sounds, the echo of footsteps, the whisper of laughter, the ghost of life trapped beneath the ash. But the world does not listen long to ghosts. And so centuries continued their slow turning, until one day men digging in the earth struck stone where no stone should have been, and beneath their hands, shapes began to appear. Walls painted with colors still bright after endless years of darkness, rooms perfectly preserved. Bread still on the table, chains still in place, a city perfectly asleep, waiting to be seen again. They called others. They uncovered more. I wore. And what emerged from the earth was not ruin, but memory made solid. Pompeii woke again, though its people did not. The air that touched its streets for the first time in centuries was thick with dust and awe. The world looked upon it and saw itself, fragile, proud, temporary, everything that lives, believing it cannot end, and everything that ends, leaving traces that outlast memory. The city that had once died in fire was reborn in silence. Every house a story, every body a question, and as the diggers brushed away centuries of ash, they uncovered faces frozen in the instant between breath and stillness, gestures of fear, of prayer, of protection. And though they could not know the names, they could feel the human weight of them. The familiarity of loss, the closeness of death that feels like sleep. Pompeii had become a mirror, showing not only what was lost, but what always remains. The small things, the marks of daily life. The half-finished tasks that reveal the tenderness of existence. A cup overturned, a cloak folded on a chair, footprint that leads nowhere. All preserved as if time itself had loved them too much to let them go, and as the sun fell upon those ruins once more, it seemed to shine not on death, but on stillness, on the quiet truth that life, no matter how loud, always ends in silence, and that silence, like ash, keeps its shape long after the fire fades. The city lay under a thick blanket of ash, still and quiet, yet it held the echoes of 1,000 tiny lives, the weight of every whispered name, every half-spoken sentence, every footstep that had once moved freely along its streets. And though the wind no longer carried voices, though the fire had claimed sound and motion alike, the air above Pompeii seemed heavy with memory, each building a silent testament to moments that would never be repeated. The baker who had pulled bread from his oven, the children running through courtyards, the merchant haggling with a stranger over the price of oil, all of them caught in the instant before the mountain struck, and now the instant stretched into eternity. Preserved beneath layers of gray dust, the voices unheard, but somehow present, the gestures frozen, a hand raised to shield eyes, a mother clutching a child, a man pressing a coin to his chest, each movement a small argument with death, each posture a refusal to vanish without mark. In the villa's frescoes still glowed faintly. Scenes of gods and heroes smiling down on rooms that would never be entered again. The colors dulled but intact, as if the ash itself had taken a vow to preserve beauty in the midst of ruin. The streets, once noisy with life, now held only shadows of footsteps pressed into hardened dust. A record of where people had tried to go, where they had hoped to escape, the directions they had chosen in desperation. The roads that led nowhere, the doors that could not open. The city had become a map of frozen intentions, monument not to architecture, but to living, to breathing, to failing to outrun what is inevitable. The amphitheater, empty yet full of ghosts, benches pressed into ash. The arena itself, a crater of memory, the sounds of cheering replaced by a hush that stretched over centuries. And above all of it, the mountain rested, its fury spent for the moment its breath, lingering like incense, reminding the living and the future that even in stillness power remained far from the city farmers walked there. Fields unaware children played on roads that led nowhere but toward silence. Travelers paused to admire distant hills, not knowing the lives buried beneath their feet. And yet the voices persisted, though unheard, carried invisibly by the ash, the memory of laughter, of weeping, of cries that had never reached the ears of gods or men, preserved in the shapes of the bodies, the angles of limbs, the press of a hand against a wall. A foot still caught in a sandal, the city was a book of gestures, a diary of breath. Each line unreadable but complete. The wind did not disturb them. Rain hardened the dust into layers that sealed everything in, and in that sealing, time itself became slow, pliant. Willing to cradle the dead as it had once carried the living, centuries passed, yet Pompeii remained. Not as rubble, but as monument. Not as history, but as memory. Streets a manuscript, written in stone and ash. And when men finally returned, when digging tools struck walls and floors and staircases, when lanterns revealed rooms untouched for generations, the unburied voices rose once more, quiet, patient, speaking not in sound, but in shape, in gesture, in the careful record of what had been a table. Still laid with amphorae and cups, a cloak folded over a chair, footprints. Leading to nothing, the positions of bodies telling stories of fear, of hope, of waiting, of surrender, every face hidden, free hand pressing, clutching, reaching, a silent choir of presence preserved. The city itself speaking softly to those who could listen, to those willing to be still, to touch walls without moving too quickly, to let eyes linger over details that time had held back. Some scholars and excavators were awed, some terrified, all moved. For Pompeii demanded a particular attention, a slow, reverent approach. And the voices were everywhere, in the curve of a stair, the tilt of a roof, the pattern of tiles pressed into ash. Each telling the story of an instant that would never return, the unburied voices were patient. They waited for centuries. They waited for hands to brush away dust, to illuminate color, to uncover the half-forgotten, and when they were seen, they told of more than fear, more than pain. More than heat and smoke, they told of life, the small acts of living. The faint rituals of breakfast and dressing, of caring and playing. The endless, quiet beauty of human motion, even as the mountains slept above. The silence of the city was not empty. It was full of intention, full of shape, full of everything that had once been. The voices spoke of everyday things, of bread baked, of wine poured, of hair combed, of children kissed, of hands held, of eyes closing in sleep. The ordinary acts preserved in extraordinary circumstances. And the deeper one looked, the more one felt the persistence of these traces, the care with which life had left its mark on the city. The ash, a custodian of memory, a gentle archivist, for those who walked the streets, who peered into the villas and shops, who traced fingers along walls. It felt as if the people had simply stepped aside, waiting for centuries to be discovered, to be recognized, to be remembered. And in that recognition, the unburied voices gained sound, not in the way we hear with ears, but in the way we feel with the mind, with the imagination. The quiet heart that can sense absence and presence simultaneously, even as the mountain remained dormant. Its slopes green, its summit peaceful, it still cradled the memory of its eruption. It still held the heat and anger that had claimed the city. It still whispered to those who listened carefully that power is patient, and that life, fragile as it is, always leaves marks. The ash hardened, streets remained, walls stayed standing. Staircases and thresholds remembered the footsteps that crossed them. And every object, every fragment, was a word in a long, ongoing sentence that told, not of death alone, but of the lives that preceded it. The diggers who unearthed Pompeii often paused, feeling the weight of those frozen gestures, the unburied voices pressing softly against the mind. And even when the tools moved, even when walls crumbled under hands, the city seemed to breathe faintly, the ash shifting, settling, speaking of time held, of life paused, of human presence made eternal. For those who could imagine, for those who could listen with more than ears, the unburied voices were alive, quiet, patient, waiting, teaching not history, but stillness, showing that in the simplest acts, the briefest moments life is. Recorded, preserved, remembered even in the face of fire and stone, and so the city remained under the mountain. Its voices hidden but unbroken, its streets still moving in frozen gestures, its buildings full of breathless people, waiting for someone to see them, to acknowledge their existence, to know that they had been, and that they had lived fully. If only for a moment, if only for an instant before the ash fell. The fire swept, the silence claimed, and in that pause, the unburied voices whispered endlessly to anyone who would be still enough to listen. To understand, to feel, for even in absence there is presence, even in death there is record. And even in a city destroyed, there is life written in the quiet. In the ash, in the frozen gestures, in the shapes that hold memory longer than words, longer than time, longer than thought itself. And so Pompeii speaks, softly, patiently, endlessly, through its unburied voices. After the eruption, the mountain rested, its slopes green once more, summit crowned with faint wisps of smoke that curled like lazy fingers into the sky. The silence it held was not empty. It was full of weight, full of memory, as if the mountain remembered every sound it had ever made, every stone it had thrown, every breath it had claimed. Above it, the wind moved slowly, careful not to disturb the ash that still blanketed Pompeii. And though centuries passed, the mountain remained vigilant, watching patient, indifferent, yet somehow conscious for those who had lived under it. Those who had run and fallen and hidden. The mountain was a presence, a steady witness. It saw the lives of people as small, bright flares that ignited and vanished, and then it waited years, passing like soft footsteps. The forests grew back, birds returned, streams flowed again, the air smelled of green and rain, the mountain's fury a memory. A heartbeat deep within stone, travelers walked its slopes. Unaware of what lay beneath, farmers planted vines along its base. Children climbed its foothills, oblivious to history, yet the mountain watched, the quiet continuing, a slow, patient meditation, and beneath its slopes, Pompeii remained buried and preserved. Its streets and houses untouched by wind or rain, the ash hardened into layers that kept time at bay. The city became a secret held within the mountain's shadow. Only to be discovered centuries later, the mountain had claimed what was human, what was fragile, and in that taking it had become eternal, silent now. Though beneath its calm, the energy that had destroyed the city still slept, molten rock resting in veins, gas trapped in stone. The potential of anger and fire held in check by patience. It was a quiet watch, not cruel, but inexorable. The mountain waited for the world to forget, for life to return above it, for those who lived to think of it only as a hill, only as a horizon, only as a shape that bore witness without comment. And yet it did comment subtly, through tremors, through the occasional plume of smoke, through the whispers of birds disturbed in the trees, a reminder that beneath calm, the mountain is alive, patient, capable, infinite. Time passed slowly. Centuries layered upon centuries, empires rose and fell, languages changed, the world reshaped itself, and yet Vesuvius remained unchanged, watching, remembering, its slopes now quiet, its summits serene. And in that serenity, there was tension, a waiting, a slow rhythm, the mountain breathing gently, and beneath it, Pompeii slept, untouched by rain or wind, preserved in ash. The unburied voices resting, waiting, the streets frozen, the gestures of the last moments captured, the mountain's watch making sure nothing would erase them entirely, even as centuries claimed memory, even as human life moved on. Even as the world forgot, it slept with vigilance, the quiet that follows fury, the calm that comes only after the deepest storm, and sometimes. When the sun set over its crown, the light caught on ash and stone, and for a heartbeat, Pompeii seemed to shimmer, as if alive again, as if the city beneath the mountain had opened its eyes for a moment, acknowledging the living. And the mountain held that moment, patient, slow, indifferent, and infinite. And yet connected, for all things beneath it were part of its quiet, part of its watch, the unburied voices and frozen streets. The ash and stone, the memories pressed into every corner, every threshold, every step of human intention. It all rested beneath the mountain's patient gaze, unchanging, steady, eternal. And the mountain, though silent, seemed to speak in its own way, in tremors too small to feel, in smoke too thin to see, the shapes of clouds drifting past its summit. And for those who knew how to listen, For those who moved slowly, for those who imagined it, said something constant. Something human, something eternal. It spoke of time, of the persistence of presence, of the permanence of small acts, of the lives that once ran its slopes, that ran its streets, that laughed and ate and feared and hoped. It spoke of the weight of history, not in stone or writing, but in breath, in pause, in observation, in the quiet attention of a mountain that remembers everything. And for centuries, it waited, watching the changes of the world, cities built and destroyed nearby, the forests that spread and receded, the people who came to live and die in its shadow. Yet it never forgot, never failed, never ceased its quiet surveillance. When humans finally returned to uncover the city it had swallowed, to brush away the ash and reveal walls and fresco staircases and tables, statues and amphorae, the mountain watched, still calm and eternal, knowing the city beneath it had been preserved, remembered, and revealed at its own pace. For the mountain does not rush, it does not demand, it simply waits, and in its waiting, it teaches that time, power, life, and death are all measured differently when viewed from the slopes of eternity. The unburied voices spoke once more when hands cleared ash, when lanterns revealed frozen gestures, when the shape of a life pressed into stone could finally be seen, and the mountain, silent above, seemed satisfied, though it did not move, though it did not speak, though it did not breathe loudly. Its quiet watch had ensured the persistence of memory, the preservation of life's echo, the careful record of what once was. And in that quiet, there was something almost human, a patience, a constancy, fidelity to the world it had shaped and observed. And for those who studied the ruins, for those who walked the preserved streets, for those who traced their fingers along walls that had not known touch for centuries, the mountain's quiet watch was felt in every heartbeat, every breath, every pause, a constant reminder that the world is larger, slower, more enduring than individual life, yet capable of holding individual moments intact. The heat of eruption long gone, the ash hardened and settled, the city preserved beneath. The mountain's watch continued, a rhythm slow enough to be almost imperceptible, yet steady, eternal. It reminded those who saw its shadow that the past is never gone, that memory can be preserved in stone and dust, in silence and stillness. In the patient attention of the mountain itself, and in that attention Pompeii slept, waited, remembered. Forever beneath Vesuvius' quiet, vigilant gaze. Centuries passed, the world moved on above Vesuvius. Empires rose and fell. Cities thrived and crumbled, and still the mountain stood, patient, silent, guarding its secret beneath layers of soil and stone. The ash that had swallowed Pompeii hardened into an invisible vault, quiet that held every sound and breath of a city, frozen yet alive in its memory. Travelers walked along roads above the buried streets, unaware of what lay beneath their feet. The air smelled of pine and rain, the wind rustled the leaves, the sun glinted off distant water, and the world above seemed ordinary, yet beneath it silence reigned. Deep, uninterrupted, complete, a silence not of absence but of preservation. The city waited, patient, for its rediscovery. And when curiosity first stirred in the hands of men who dug into the hills, it was a tentative touch, a brush against stone, a whisper of what had been. At first nothing seemed remarkable. The soil gave way to hardened ash. Fragments of pottery appeared, small traces of everyday life. But as the excavations deepened, a pattern emerged, a city frozen in motion, gestures held, objects untouched. Footprints pressed into hardened dust, staircases preserved, walls standing, frescoes revealed, colors surviving the centuries. The rediscovery of silence was like opening a window into another world. The unburied voices, long patient, began to speak once more. Not with sound, but with presence, with shape. With memory pressed into every surface, each room a stage, each street a corridor of frozen motion. It was not chaos that greeted the diggers, but calm, deliberate. A city preserved in the instant before destruction, the silence was palpable, thick, as if the mountain itself had instructed the world to move gently, to observe without hurry, to feel without disturbing. And the objects that emerged told stories more human than history. A cup overturned, a cloak draped, a child frozen mid-step, a dog pressed to a threshold, all preserved in gestures that revealed not only fear and panic, but tenderness, care, intention, lives lived fully in their brief, interrupted span. As the excavators moved carefully through the streets, they felt the weight of centuries, the accumulation of dust, the echo of lives. The patience of the mountain above, every step brought another revelation, another frozen moment, another silent voice. The rediscovery of silence was also the rediscovery of life. Paradoxical though it seemed, for even in death, even in ash, even in a city claimed by fire and smoke, there remained the record of humanity. Carefully pressed into layers of stone and dust, for every room uncovered, every fresco revealed, every threshold leaned, spoke of moments before disaster. Moments of morning bread, of conversation, of children playing, of lovers walking, families tending gardens. Gestures so ordinary they seemed eternal when preserved in the absence of motion. And the mountain, quiet above, seemed to grant permission for this revelation. Patient still, indifferent, yet watchful. Letting the world see what it had held for centuries, the streets once busy with life now lined with tools and lanterns of men who moved slowly. Careful not to disturb the memory, careful not to erase the silence. The rediscovery of silence was not sudden. It was a slow unveiling. Layer by layer, room by room, street by street revealing. Pompeii as it had been in the last moments of its living days, the air thick with dust and the quiet hum of attentive work. The unburied voices were everywhere, pressing softly against minds that would listen, teaching that preservation is itself an act of care, that the past is not gone, only waiting to be observed, to be felt, to be acknowledged. Each gesture captured beneath the hardened ash seemed deliberate. A city recorded for those who could read it, for those who could pause long enough to notice. The rediscovery of silence carried with it a strange reverence for the world above, full of noise and motion, suddenly felt smaller, slower, less certain. The city beneath reminded the living of what is fleeting, what is fragile, what is infinitely precious. The work of uncovering walls and staircases and mosaics was itself a meditation. A slow reading of gestures frozen in time, every step measured, every touch cautious, every breath taken lightly so as not to disturb centuries of careful stillness. And as the diggers moved deeper, the silence expanded, encompassing them, enfolding them, so that even words seemed unnecessary. Even thoughts became softer, slower, more deliberate. The rediscovery of silence was teaching patience, teaching attention, teaching respect for what had been lost, for what had been preserved. The mountain's presence above loomed in shadow, green and calm, yet full of memory, and the rediscovery of silence was also an encounter with that presence, the dormant power that had claimed the city, the patient observer that had waited centuries for hands to uncover what it had hidden. And every layer of ash removed revealed not only buildings and streets, but intention. The gestures of people going about ordinary acts, frozen mid-motion, every object a testament, every footprint a record. And as the excavators reached the forum, the temples, the amphitheater, the quiet expanded further. A city breathing softly under layers of earth. The rediscovery of silence was complete in the sense that every uncovering was a revelation. Every detail a whisper, every preserved wall, a testament to lives lived. And though no one could hear voices, the gestures spoke volumes. A mother cradling a child, a baker's tools left where they had been, a dog pressed to the corner of a courtyard, the unburied voices returning in stillness. The rediscovery of silence was also the rediscovery of the human rhythm, the ordinary acts that define life, preserved, immortalized, beyond fear, beyond destruction, beyond the passage of time. The mountain above rested still, patient, its quiet watch unbroken, even as humans walked the streets they uncovered, even as walls were brushed clean, even as frescoes revealed faces and colors. The mountain remained a silent sentinel, a reminder that calm and destruction, memory and forgetting, life and death are always intertwined. And in that intertwining, the rediscovery of silence became more than an archaeological event. It became a meditation on the persistence of memory, the endurance of presence, the careful record of lives interrupted. And in every stone, in every fragment, in every preserved gesture, the city whispered again, teaching the living how to be still, how to notice, how to feel, how to honor the moments that are all we truly ever have. and in that silence rediscovered, the unburied voices spoke endlessly, patiently, quietly, like a lullaby to the centuries, teaching that even after fire and ash, even after sudden endings, life leaves traces, and those traces can be heard if one only listens. In the quiet of the unearthed streets, as the traces of lives pressed into stone spoke louder than words, each threshold, each step, each fallen tile carrying the memory of people who had lived and moved and feared, the city itself had become a record, not of architecture, but of the smallest human gestures, the gestures that define existence, a cup left on a table, a cloak draped over a chair, footprints frozen mid-step, all telling of a day that would never continue. The lives traced in stone were patient, enduring, waiting for hands to brush away ash, for eyes to see what time had held in silence, each preserved wall a page, each mosaic a line of poetry, each figure pressed into plaster a story, not of fame or wealth, but of ordinary life. And as the excavators moved carefully through Pompeii, they felt the weight of these presences, felt the careful intention of movement halted, gestures frozen, every detail revealing the rhythm of daily existence, a mother holding a child at a fountain, a man counting coins at a table, a baker pausing with a loaf in hand, the lives traced in stone told of hope and fear, of the ordinary and the urgent, of small joys and mundane tasks, all captured in the instant before the mountain's fury descended. Even the animals of the city, dogs, cats, birds, frozen mid-motion, told stories of loyalty, of curiosity, of instinct, the living preserved in the moment they had last breathed. The mountain's eruption had stolen their motion, but not their record. The city was a manuscript of humanity, each stone a letter, each ash-encased gesture a sentence. And in that writing, in that record, the unburied voices whispered endlessly, teaching that even in destruction, there is preservation. Even in silence, there is story. The lives traced in stone were not heroic, not grand, but ordinary. And in their ordinariness, they were eternal. And as the sun fell upon the exposed streets, the shadows fell across mosaics and thresholds, highlighting the shapes of gestures, the contours of motion, the preserved intentions of people long gone, and in that light the city seemed alive again. Not with sound, but with presence. Not with motion, but with memory. The mountain above remained quiet, patient, its crown green, its slopes serene. Yet beneath it, life's traces waited, preserved, eternal. The lives traced in stone reminded the living that even in the face of sudden endings, the ordinary matters, the small acts endure. The careful placement of objects, the habitual motion of the body, the gestures repeated daily, all become records, all become stories, all become whispers to those who come after. And as archaeologists uncovered rooms and courtyards, as they brushed away centuries of ash and dust, the traces revealed more than fear, more than panic. They revealed care, love, attention, intention. And in that revelation, the mountain seemed to approve, patient, silent, ever watchful, teaching that time does not erase, that memory can persist, that even the smallest life can leave a mark. The lives traced in stone included the wealthy, and the poor, the young and the old, merchants and laborers, children and animals. Everyone pressed into the same record, the ash a great equalizer, preserving not fame, but presence not accomplishment, but act. And in this quiet archive, one could see the rhythm of life itself, the heartbeat of a city frozen, the pattern of human motion captured forever, doors held ajar, staircases climbed, halfway furniture arranged as it had been windows open to a morning that would never continue. The mountain's breath no longer consumed the city, but protected its record. The lives traced in stone were patient, enduring, infinite in their silent testimony. And as centuries passed, the rediscovery of these traces became a meditation, a slow reading of human rhythm, a quiet observation of what it means to exist. The unburied voices spoke not in sound, but in the shapes they left behind, in the impressions, in the frozen gestures, in the carefully preserved details, teaching the living about presence, about attention, about the delicate fragility and persistence of human life. In every new discovery, every room uncovered, every footprint revealed was a gentle reminder that life leaves marks, And though life ends, the traces remain, and the mountain above watched. Patient, knowing eternal, the lives traced in stone were a library of gestures, a testament of ordinary existence, a record of human breath held in suspension. And for those who walked among these preserved streets, who traced fingers over walls and mosaics, the weight of those gestures, the memory of those moments pressed softly into the mind, reminding them of mortality, of continuity, of the persistence of memory. The mountain, quiet above, seemed to smile in its own way, the city beneath preserved. Not for grandeur or glory, but for life itself. Every step, every hand, every glance preserved in ash and stone. The lives traced in stone spoke to patience, to stillness, to observation, to care, teaching that what is ordinary can become eternal. What is fleeting can become preserved, what is small can become monumental, and as night fell upon the exposed ruins, the shadows deepened. Stretching across thresholds and courtyards, the unburied voices pressing softly against imagination, the city shimmering faintly, alive in memory, alive in shape, alive in gesture. The mountain remained, patient, silent, eternal, its crown green, its slopes serene, watching over the city it had claimed, preserving the lives it had touched, teaching the world above that life, no matter how ordinary, leaves, traces, traces that endure, traces that speak, traces that whisper endlessly. As long as someone is willing to listen, the lives traced in stone continue their quiet lesson, calm, patient, infinite. And the city beneath the mountain waits, still and complete, holding the unburied voices, holding the traces of life, holding the quiet memory of existence itself, preserved in stone, preserved in ash, preserved in time, eternal beneath Vesuvius' watchful crown. The mountain rose above the land, its slopes green, its summit calm. Yet beneath that quiet surface lay centuries of memory, the eruption that had claimed Pompeii lingering like a pulse, out invisible yet undeniable, casting a shadow not only across the city it had buried, but across generations. The shadow of Vesuvius was eternal, not in darkness alone, but in presence, in weight, in the way it demanded attention without movement. Travelers walking near its base felt a pull they could not name, quiet reverence, a subtle awe, for the mountain carried within it not only fire, but patience, and that patience stretched over centuries. The city beneath remained hidden, preserved in ash, frozen in gestures, each street, each house, each threshold a record of lives interrupted. The unburied voices pressing softly against memory, waiting for someone to listen. The eternal shadow of Vesuvius was more than geological. It was temporal, psychological, a reminder that even the calmest presence may contain immense power. Even the greenest slopes may cover fury, and those who lived in its vicinity for centuries after learn to respect not just its size, but its silence, its stillness, its watchful patience. As time passed, the world above changed. Cities rose and fell. People came and went. Empires thrived and collapsed. Languages shifted, yet the mountain remained unchanged, ever present. And beneath it, Pompeii lay waiting. The lives within frozen, preserved, the gestures untouched, the ash hardened into layers that resisted time. Holding memory in suspension, the shadow of Vesuvius extended beyond the physical. It reached into the minds of those who lived near it. The stories of destruction whispered across generations, tales of sudden fire, of ash falling like gray snow, of screams swallowed by the mountain's breath, of people caught mid-step, frozen in terror and care, teaching the living to move with caution, to respect the ground beneath them, to understand that nature is patient and can strike suddenly. And as centuries passed, curiosity led men and women to dig into the slopes, to uncover what had been lost. The rediscovery of Pompeii brought the shadow closer, not in darkness, but in understanding, revealing the city beneath layers of time, showing the frozen gestures, the unburied voices, the lives pressed into stone and ash. And even as the city was uncovered, the mountain above remained silent, watchful, its shadow eternal, teaching through presence rather than action, reminding the world that the past is never truly gone, only waiting for hands to brush away dust, for eyes to see what has been preserved, every excavation a dialogue with memory, Every uncovered room, a conversation with centuries, and the shadow of Vesuvius seemed to embrace all of it, holding the past, the present, and the living together. The mountain's calm exterior contrasted with the violence it had once released, reminder that extremes exist: patience and fury, stillness and eruption. Life and death, all intertwined. The city beneath its shadow revealed gestures of daily life, of mundane acts made eternal, a mother holding her child, a man counting coins. A baker paused mid-motion, animals frozen in instinctive behavior, every detail preserved by the ash, every movement recorded. The unburied voices soft yet persistent, whispering to those who uncovered them, telling stories not of fame, but of existence, living, of breathing, of the ordinary elevated to eternal. And in this eternal shadow, there was a lesson, calm, slow, unhurried. The mountain had claimed Pompeii, yet in doing so, had preserved it, had ensured that life's traces would endure, would be seen again, would be understood. The eternal shadow was thus both a warning and a gift, showing the power of nature and the persistence of memory. The excavations revealed streets, villas, courtyards, forums, temples, every detail captured. Every gesture frozen, the unburied voices resuming their patient communication, teaching observers how to read silence, how to see motion held still, how to understand that life, even in its abrupt end, leaves traces. The shadow stretched further, encompassing not only the buried city, but the minds of those who came near, shaping imagination, shaping reverence, shaping respect. Centuries of oversight pressed into awareness, and the mountain continued to watch, patient, silent, calm. Its presence a constant in a world of change. Storms passed, seasons turned, empires rose and fell. Yet the mountain's shadow remained, eternal, and beneath it Pompeii rested, frozen, preserved. Its streets and walls a manuscript of lives lived, gestures recorded, moments held, and in that manuscript the unburied voices spoke endlessly, teaching patience, teaching observation, teaching reverence for the ordinary. The eternal shadow of Vesuvius was thus more than geological. It was moral, psychological, temporal. It extended into the consciousness of those who discovered the city, reminding them that life is fragile, fleeting, yet capable of leaving lasting traces. Every uncovered object, every restored wall, every revealed mosaic. A word, a sentence, a story, and the mountain watched silent, patient, eternal, as the city beneath was slowly read and understood. The shadow enveloping not just the streets and houses, but the minds of the living, teaching the importance of stillness, the weight of time, the persistence of memory, the subtle patience of the natural world. And as sunlight fell over the ruins, as shadows stretched across the exposed streets, the unburied voices pressed softly against imagination, whispering of lives that had been, gestures that had mattered, moments that were held forever beneath ash and stone. The eternal shadow reminded observers of their own impermanence. It offered consolation in the persistence of trace. The mountain above, calm, green, serene, bore witness to the unfolding of centuries, to the slow excavation, to the quiet rediscovery, to the enduring whispers of the unburied voices, teaching that while lives end, the gestures, the small acts, the ordinary moments, traced in stone, in ash, in memory, endure beneath the patient, eternal shadow of Vesuvius. And as the wind moved gently over its slopes, as birds called and streams flowed, as humans walked the uncovered streets, the mountain remained still timeless, its shadow eternal, a constant observer, a keeper of memory, a witness to lives traced in ash, in stone, in gesture, a teacher of patience, of reverence, of the quiet persistence of life remembered. The city beneath the mountain spoke softly, endlessly. Its voice carried not in sound, but in the weight of presence. In the gestures frozen in ash and stone, the walls and streets holding the memory of life, of motion, of ordinary days suspended forever. And as the excavators moved carefully through the uncovered spaces, they felt the breath of history pressing against their awareness. The unburied voices whispering not in urgency, but in patience, teaching that life, even abruptly ended, leaves traces that endure every threshold, every table, every footstep captured in silence. every object revealing the rhythm of a life, the pattern of a day, the intimacy of existence. Pompeii's endless whisper was not mournful. It was calm, slow, hypnotic, a lullaby of presence pressed into stone, a meditation on the persistence of being. And as the mountain rested above, green and serene, its shadow eternal, it seemed to cradle the city, not with fury, but with patience, not with destruction, but with preservation. Every eruption long past, every fire cooled, yet the memory of it remained in the posture of houses, in the slope of roofs, in the tilt of walls, teaching the living that endings are neither silent nor final when recorded in gesture. In object, in shape, the endless whisper flowed through streets and forums. Villas and baths, amphitheaters and temples, tracing the lives of those caught mid-motion, mothers holding children, merchants counting coins, bakers pausing with loaves in hand, dogs curled in corners, footprints frozen in paths. Every detail pressed into eternity, and the excavators moving lanterns across frescoes, tracing mosaics with gloved fingers, felt the quiet of presence, the calm insistence of memory. Pompeii's endless whisper did not shout, it did not demand. It only existed, an existence. Preserved in ash and stone became its own story, teaching that ordinary life, observed carefully, can endure longer than fire, longer than collapse, and longer than centuries of soil and silence. And as the work continued, as rooms were revealed, courtyards cleaned, walls exposed, the whisper grew. Not in volume, but in weight, pressing against the mind, slowing thought, softening motion, reminding observers that the lives captured here had been ordinary, human, real, yet immortal. For the mountain above watched silently, eternal, patient, its shadow encompassing both the buried city and the living observers, teaching through calm presence, through observation, through quiet endurance. The endless whisper spoke of the moments before eruption, the small acts of existence, the gestures frozen in ash, the city captured in a single timeless instant. And though no one could hear voices, the shapes, the positions, the preserved objects communicated endlessly, pressing lessons of life into anyone willing to pause, to notice, to be still. The whisper was everywhere, in thresholds, in doorways, in staircases, bowls left on tables, in footprints pressed into dust, in frescoed walls smiling faintly from centuries past, teaching the persistence of ordinary action, the preservation of intention, the immortality of small acts. And as the sun shifted across the uncovered city, light revealed shadows cast centuries ago, angles of gestures, the frozen motions of breath and reach, every surface telling a story, every object a word, every preserved detail, a sentence in an infinite silent manuscript. Pompeii's endless whisper moved through time, linking the living and the dead, teaching that memory exists not only in writing or speech, but in gesture, in shape, in presence, in ash and stone. Ash! And as layers of centuries were brushed away, revealing streets and courtyards, villas and temples, the whisper pressed more insistently, demanding attention, patience, observation, teaching that the smallest details matter, that the ordinary is eternal when preserved, that silence itself is a form of voice, that a city frozen in ash is a city alive in memory. The mountain above, calm and eternal, seemed to approve, patient, indifferent, yet intimately connected to the city below. The endless whisper flowed from street to street, house to house, room to room, staircase to courtyard, pressing softly against the mind, against imagination, against the heart, carrying the gestures of lives interrupted, frozen mid-motion, yet eternal. The whisper revealed love, care, fear, hope, intention, the daily acts of life elevated into immortality by the pause of destruction. Pompeii's endless whisper was not solitary. It was shared, reaching anyone willing to notice, teaching through observation, through patience, through calm attention, reminding that every life leaves traces, that every motion matters, that the ordinary persists beyond time, and the mountain, silent above, watched, patient, eternal. Its shadow, a protective presence over both city and observers. Its calm, a lesson in endurance. The city beneath it remained a record of humanity, a manuscript of existence, a collection of gestures, every threshold, every stare, every object a word. every footprint a line of story. The unburied voices pressed softly against imagination, teaching endlessly, softly, without urgency, without hurry. And as the diggers worked, as the light shifted, as centuries of dust were removed, the whisper became tangible. A sensation of life frozen yet persistent, a meditation on the ordinary, a lullaby of stillness. Teaching that life, though finite, leaves permanent traces. That presence can outlast fire. That gesture can outlast centuries. That memory is preserved in ash and stone, and as the mountains' shadows stretched across the city, encompassing streets, villas, temples, forums, baths, the whisper became infinite, flowing through time, space, mind, imagination, touching all who paused to see, to feel, to imagine. Teaching endlessly, softly, patiently, that life matters, that the ordinary is immortal, that the traces of existence endure. And even as the sun fell below the horizon, even as night drew long shadows across streets and courtyards, even as the mountain rested calm and green above, Pompeii's endless whisper persisted. Eternal, patient, soft, a quiet meditation on life, memory, gesture, and presence. A lullaby of ash and stone, a reminder that though everything ends, traces remain, unburied, preserved, whispered endlessly. Waiting for the world to listen, to feel, to notice, teaching patience, teaching reverence, teaching that the small acts of life, the ordinary gestures, the frozen motions captured in ash and stone, are eternal, and in that whisper the city lives forever beneath the eternal, watchful, calm, green, patient slopes of Vesuvius. Pompeii's endless whisper flowing softly through time, through memory, through stillness, teaching all who listen. That life, though brief, leaves echoes, and echoes like ash endure,